They're going to receive the promise of the Father. They're going to receive another helper, another comforter, your translation may say. And he identifies that comforter, that helper, as the Holy Spirit. And in each of these chapters, there is a segment, John 14, 15, and 16, about what the Holy Spirit is going to do in and through and for these men. And perhaps the best description is when Jesus says he's going to bring to remembrance all that I've said to you. He's going to guide you into all the truth. And at this point, we can see that there was that need for the Holy Spirit in the lives of these men. But as you've finished looking at these first few verses, he commands them not to depart from Jerusalem, and he tells them why you are going to be baptized in the Holy Spirit. There are only 2 cases of Holy Spirit baptism in the New Testament where people were endowed by the Holy Spirit to perform some miraculous act. It occurred on the day of Pentecost, Acts 2, 1 through 4, when the Holy Spirit came upon the apostles, totally immersing them in his power. And in Acts 10 and 11, at the household of Cornelius, in order to convince the Jews that the gospel was for Gentiles also, God poured out his Spirit on Cornelius' family, so that there was undeniable proof that Gentiles were to be included. I mean, Jesus had said it in the Great Commission. Preach the gospel to every creature. Make disciples of all the nations, beginning at Jerusalem to the ends of the earth. The good news is to go. It certainly was and is designed for Gentiles as well as Jews. Peter refers in Acts 10 and 11 to the phenomena that took place there as the same as what happened to he and the other apostles at the beginning when the church began on the day of Pentecost. It was convincing the Jews that the Gentiles were subjects of the gospel. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. And that's what Paul writes in Romans 1 and verse 16. And so we must move. We must move. And so these men were to wait. And that's exactly what they did. But the question that shows how lacking their knowledge was and how ingrained the thinking of Judaism was in these men that had been with Jesus. Do you at this time intend to restore the kingdom to Israel? Jesus just sort of passes over that particular question because they would have a fuller understanding and knowledge once the Holy Spirit guides them, calls to remembrance all that Jesus said and taught. They would then have a better understanding. But at this particular point, the case was not so. And so Jesus just sort of passes over them and reminds them of what their work is going to be. They were going to be witnesses, witnesses of the resurrected Christ. We saw over the space of 40 days, this text will tell us, Jesus appeared to these men numerous times in convincing ways, in ways that were unimpeachable, that were proofs that he was alive after his crucifixion, that the resurrection was the case. And so Jesus says, you're going to be my witnesses, and of course gives that outline that you can use following the book of Acts. But we must hurry. We must get along. The ascension of Jesus is the next particular section that we'll look at here, beginning in verse 9. These men are standing with Jesus, and Jesus begins to ascend, and they're looking up into heaven, and two men appear dressed in white, which infers that they were angelic beings. Why are you standing here looking up into heaven? Don't you know this same Jesus that you see ascending is going to come in like manner as you have seen him go? In 1 Thessalonians 4, in 2 Thessalonians 1, in 1 Corinthians 15, we're told about Christ's return. No mention of him ever setting foot on earth. But when the trumpet sounds and the voice of the archangel cries out, the dead are going to be raised, the living will be changed, and together they'll meet the Lord in the air, and they'll be with the Lord forever. Paul wrote these words to encourage the Christians and to improve their understanding of their family and friends who had died before Jesus returned. The living will have no advantage over the dead when Jesus returns. And so the message there is important for us. And so they returned to Jerusalem. And we have a listing, as in Matthew 10, Luke 6, of the apostles' names in this particular passage. And of course, we note that Judas' name is missing. And one of the significant events of this particular chapter begins when Peter stands up, quotes the psalmist to these men and say, look, David, or the Holy Spirit said by David, we need to appoint someone to take his place. And by prophecy, two men are put forth. And notice the qualifications of an apostle. He had to be with Jesus from his baptism by John through his public ministry. And he had to be a witness of the resurrected Christ. Two men were put forth. And the interesting thing here is that one is selected. They preface the selection with a prayer. And they prayed that God would make known which of these men would be the one to take the place of Judas and to fill the gap, as it were. You know, it's interesting what Luke writes concerning Judas in this particular passage. Judas was fully an apostle. He was fully an apostle. That means that when they were sent out empowered to cast out demons and to heal the sick. Judas possessed those powers, but by transgression. You know, modern translations refuse to translate the word transgression, which means crossing the line, which is translated sin, in connection with Judas, from which Judas fell. It's like when the word proof was used. The King James Version says, by convincing proofs. The word convincing is not in the text, but it is in the idea of the proofs. The proof is unassailable. It's convincing proof. It's not some speculation. It's not someone's idea, but it's fact. But in this particular case, Judas fell by transgression. He sinned. And Luke simply says he went to his own place. You know, the gospel writers are particularly kind, I think, in dealing with Judas' death. It was an ugly thing. The money that he received, he refused, tried to give it back, went out, hanged himself. The priest took that money, bought the field. We don't know what caused, whether he hung there long enough that the rope broke or that his body deteriorated to the point that it fell to the ground. But it's a nasty scene. Or did it break before? You know, and on the jagged rocks, his body burst open. But whatever. It is a sad and ignoble end to a man who once walked with Jesus, was one of the 12 who participated in the ministry of the 12. It is truly sad. But as you look at the rest of this particular section here, we know that Matthias is selected as the 12th apostle at this particular case. And so to conclude this chapter here, you know, keep these things in mind, particularly. The sign of the coming of the kingdom. The power. You're going to receive the power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. When you're baptized in the Holy Spirit. The kingdom, the church, will have its beginning. And so, Pentecost, the significant feast that will have significant numbers of visitors in Jerusalem to observe Pentecost. They're going to hear the gospel in its fullness. And it's Peter who uses the keys, just as Jesus predicted, that will open the door to the kingdom, the church, for lost men and women, for the salvation that's in Jesus. And it's going to be a great day. And Jack is going to have that for you next week. Hey, believe it or not, I have finished before the second bell. Thank you for your attention. You're dismissed.